Hey guys, I'm Will. Welcome back to my series on how to record at home. This is part 2, recording basics. So as we talked in part 1, we have some of our essential gear. We've got our audio interface, we've got a microphone, some headphones, a MIDI controller, and a laptop. So let's walk through the recording basics. And we'll start by kind of doing an overview of our recording software. Now again, I'm using GarageBand, but everything that I'm talking about can be applied towards any other software. So in GarageBand, just a few things to note. You've got your start, stop, record up here. You've got your loop browser right here. You can create a track by clicking on this plus, and you can select MIDI, audio, or drummer, which we will walk through what the three of those are. You can change your time signature, your key, your tempo, and you can do that by dragging this up and down. Here's your metronome for either playback or when you're recording. If you click this kind of whitish bar, you can select what to loop. So, oops. If I do that, you can see it starts looping again, and you can also command that from up here. If you select any of the tracks, you can click on this library, and this kind of gives you some preset settings. So if you know you're going to be recording vocals, you can say, I want some bright vocals. If you click here, this is going to be your smart controls, and up here, this is going to be your editor. So if we do smart controls, you can see for the track that we've selected, you can control some EQ, some echo, some reverb, ambience, etc. You can turn things on, off. Now, this is specific to GarageBand. Typically, the way that you would work on different effects like this would be the plugins. So if you see down here, you click plugins, this is actually everything that we're messing with. So if I turn on the EQ, you'll see that the EQ turned on. If I turn on the echo, you'll see that the delay is turned on. You can also mess with the EQ right here. This is what's called a graphic EQ. You have your monitoring right here. You can select what input you want, etc. So I encourage you to kind of poke around and figure out the different functions. We'll obviously walk through some of those together. So in order to start recording, we need to make sure that in our software that we've selected our audio interface. So you can do that by going to your preferences, and this works for all digital audio workstations. Under preferences, audio, you want to make sure that your input and your output is whatever interface that you're using. Now that we've got everything configured, let's start by recording an audio track. So I'm using a microphone. You can do this with an instrument as well. So on our track, it's important to note that we have the proper input selected. So on my first input, input 1, I have my microphone plugged in. And you can see right here, my input is selected to 1. So now if we want to be able to hear ourselves, we would turn on monitoring, and you can do that up here as well. Check, check. So now I can hear myself. If I need to hear myself more, I can turn it up here. If I only want to hear myself in the left, I can do that, or the right, do that. Now, on your interface, you're going to have a gain knob. So if I turn up the gain, that gets really loud. If I turn it down, it gets really soft. It's important to note that when we're monitoring, you're going to change the volume and not necessarily mess with the gain, okay? And the reason for this is if I talk kind of loud, you can see up here it's getting red. You can see right here it's getting red. And so we don't want to record something that gets overblown like this. Doesn't sound good. And especially if we start talking louder, it's going to get worse. So we always want to test our gain by starting the monitoring here. And then when we click record, we can start recording. Now if I need to hear myself more, I can turn up the volume, and it doesn't necessarily affect the gain. Of course, you can turn it down too if you don't want to hear yourself. But either way, you're still recording. So now if we listen back, then when we click record, we can start recording. Now if I need to hear myself. So let's actually do something fun. So in GarageBand, we can work with loops and we can work with MIDI. And so if we have a MIDI track and we have a MIDI keyboard, we can do this. The wonderful thing about GarageBand is you actually don't need a MIDI keyboard. If you hit Command K, you can activate the MIDI keyboard on your computer keyboard. And so you can use the keys to type. And so the way you would do that is just hit record. We can exit out of this. Now, if we want to check our MIDI track, you just double click here and you can see the notes right here. You can also see the score if you know how to read music, which is a cool function. And I encourage you to kind of dive deeper into that. Once you've recorded MIDI, you can select all the notes and then hit this Q, which means quantize, which, as you see, snaps it to the grid. So that's the 16th notes. We can say quarter notes, and you can see it pushes it all the way to the start of the next bar. Now, one thing that I forgot to do is, when we're recording, we can select our metronome so we can hear the tempo. So now, we can drag this to the start. Now, just a quick little trick, if you want to shorten this, you can, the bottom half here, you see that it turns into this bracket with a couple arrows. You can move that to where you want and then drag this back. Now again, I will select everything, and you can also do this by clicking Command A, and I'll say 1/4 note, quantize. And now, great. You can also shorten this here by doing this. And then, if we want to, we can loop. So the top half turns into this bracket with a little loop signal, or loop symbol. We can start looping that. Now, at any point, if you need to make changes, you can make one change and it applies to the whole loop. Also, we can turn this a little faster. Maybe a little faster than that. So now we've got a basic loop. So if we click on the loops, we can actually dive into more. So what's fun about this in GarageBand is you can select a bunch of different things. You can do guitars, bass, synth, all types of percussion. So if we click on all drums, do some analog drum machine. So just another thing to note, if you see a blue symbol, it's going to be an audio file. If you see green, it's going to be MIDI. And if you see yellow, it's going to be drummer. So also you can select the drummer track here by clicking the plus sign. And what's cool about this, I'm going to mute this. Actually, I'm going to solo this. So the drummer is a cool feature where you can kind of manipulate it's like an actual drummer. So if we hit start, you can do soft and simple, or complex and loud. You can say the toms, level 3, cymbals, level 3. We can throw in a shaker, level 3, and so you'll hear the difference. If we turn that off, toms only. So that's a fun tool to play around with. But if we go back to our loops here, we'll solo this. If you want to get creative, you can, shorten that maybe in half, or even down to that, loop that. And then if you want to get even more creative, you can copy this, paste it, maybe shorten it even more, loop that. You get the idea. So I encourage you to definitely play around with this. The other thing with the loops is if you see a green loop, you can drag that in and it's actually a MIDI loop. So now you can see the MIDI notes and we can actually change it. So if we solo this and listen, I say, you know, you want to maybe delete that. Or if you hold down Command, you see the pencil, you can actually draw this in. And this works for all MIDI tracks, this pencil. You can even change the length if it's a note. So that's kind of an overview of how you work with loops in MIDI and GarageBand. There's one thing to note: if you do have a MIDI controller, you can use this on any MIDI track. So for instance, this drum kit, and you can record that, or going back to our original MIDI track. And so let's just put something down really quick. So if I go to here, maybe we do a synthesizer, some brass, some bright synth brass. So to record, we just hit this right here. Right? Put this at the beginning. Very short recording, but that's all we need. So on our track, we'll just lay down some quick vocals. Don't forget, we need an input monitor. Got our volume up. The gain sounds like it's pretty good. Something that's kind of nice when you're recording vocals is adding a little bit of reverb. So you can do that right here in this knob. Or if you're working in GarageBand or any other software, you can add a reverb plugin and kind of mess with the settings till you get what you like. A little bit more wet. Hello. So one of the things I'm going to make sure I have selected before I start recording is the count in. So I get 1, 2, 3, 4 before I start, and the metronome so I can hear the tempo. I'm going to turn everything else down so I can hear my vocals. So I can hear my vocals a little bit louder than everything else. Here we go. I meant to say, the way that I'm getting around the software so quickly is by hitting Enter, which takes it all the way back to the start. And the space bar stops and starts everything. So now that we've got a basic track, we'll go over some really basic mixing tips. Again, I'm not a professional, and I definitely encourage you to do a lot of research when it comes to mixing. So if we start with my vocals, and we'll loop it here to keep it going. Turn up the brights. A little bit more reverb. Our MIDI track. Our drumming. Another tip for building, a track to give it a little bit of dimension is to pan things left and right. So I'll take this one drum track and put it on the right ear. I'll put this drums in the left. And as I mentioned before, with vocals, you can also manipulate it with the graphic EQ. And so if I solo this, you can kind of hear the difference as so the biggest thing for mixing is really make it sound the way that you want it to. If you do want to get into professional mixing, like I've said numerous times, that is something you should definitely continue to research. So another big part with mixing and editing in general is what's called automation. In GarageBand, you can activate this by just hitting the letter A. So if we do that, you can see the tracks kind of expand and they kind of turn a little darker, and you can see these lines. So if I click, now I've started the volume automation. So you can see volume here. So if I click down, it creates another little dot, and so I can now mess with the volume and automate it. So this is very practical if you want to fade things in and out. So if we solo my audio, you can see the volume bar moving. You can also do this with panning. So if we come up, we hit pan, we click here. So right now it's in the center, but if I want to go this direction and this direction, you'll hear it go to different ears. Make it a little bit more intense. Yeah. And so you can kind of see with automation, you can control a lot of different things. Reverb, if you've got different plugins selected, there's a lot of different things to automate. So I encourage you to dive into that as well. Once we're satisfied with our track, we'll need to export it. So in GarageBand, you can do that by clicking Share. I'll unmute everything. Share, Export Song to Disk. And here, you can see many different options. You can see AAC, which is an Apple format, an MP3, which is a very, very universal format, an AIFF, which is an uncompressed format, as well as WAV. WAV and MP3 are going to be your most common. MP3 is great because it's a smaller file size. WAV is a bigger file size, but it's the higher fidelity. So if you're just sharing songs with somebody or you're emailing, I honestly would just do MP3 because it's smaller and easier. But if you're exporting your audio for a podcast or to put out onto Spotify or anything, you want to do WAV because it's the higher fidelity. One thing to note is whenever you are ready, in every software you can select how long the track is. So if I would have exported it, or also what's called bouncing, there would be all of this dead space right here. So we can shorten that. I can even shorten this. Another thing in GarageBand is if you select here and you hit Command T, that kind of chops the file. So if we do this, so I'll shorten this here to end it, shorten this. We'll copy this to end it here. We'll even make it even crazier. So if I copy and paste this, so if we export that, export song to disk, export to my music folder, we'll do a high quality MP3, we'll say example export. Now if I go to my music folder, example, and on a Mac you can preview your files by clicking on the space bar. So, thanks for stopping by. I hope you learned something about some recording basics. Again, this is in GarageBand, but you can apply a lot of these concepts to any other software. If you have questions or you need anything else, please feel free to reach out on social media, or you can DM me, or you can email me. And I do encourage you to go to willhickel.com/blog to see this associated blog post and learn a little bit more. And good luck recording.